Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and it's time for another deck tech. I am going to be really cranking these Commander 2021 deck techs out. I said I wasn't going to do as many as Kaldheim, but I probably will end up doing as many. There's just so many commanders from this 2021 set that I really think are make interesting build-arounds. Overall, I'm not super impressed with the set. I am impressed with the commanders though, and I think that's the most important part. So today it's Felisa, Fang of the Silverquill, 2, a white and a black, Vampire Wizard, 3/2, flying, Mentor, and she has a very interesting ability. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, create X tapped 2/1 white and black Inkling creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of counters it had on it. So there's two very important notes here to take away from that ability, okay? The first one is it's any kind of counters, okay? So it doesn't matter what kind of counters, and there's lots of different counters in the game, let me assure you. When I actually went on a search, man, there's so many different kinds of counters. It's unreal. The other thing is you create X Inkling tokens where X is the number of counters it had on it. So if a creature has 2+1/+1 counters, a lifelink counter, a charge counter, right? That's 4 different counters because X is the number of counters it had on it of any kind. So when it dies, you get 4 Inkling creatures, right? So that's very important. I decided the way to go about this deck, and there's a lot of ways to go about this deck. Let me tell you right now. I mean, you can make a Kai counter deck if you want. The Kamigawa guys with the Kai counters, those are counters. You can make a Spirit Arcane deck maybe. Level counters, if you want to make a level counter deck, you can do that as well. If you want to go with more of a tribal sort of theme. For me, I just basically look through all of the cards in the history of Magic in this color scheme and pick the ones that I thought were really neat that had counters on them. But more importantly, I wanted as much value as I could get. Okay, I wanted a creature that is going to give me lots of Inkling tokens for the least amount of mana. So for example, Acacian Money Changer, 1 mana, 0/2. Acacian Money Changer enters the battlefield with 3 credit counters on it. When Acacian Money Changer enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to you. That's, inconsequential. We don't really care about that. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a credit counter on Acacian Money Changer. Sacrifice Acacian Money Changer. You gain 1 life for each credit counter on Acacian Money Changer. Activate this ability only during your upkeep. This card is fantastic in this deck. This card is, I think, an auto-include. I just love commanders that you take a creature like this that is essentially awful and it becomes fantastic, right? So it's 1 mana. It's going to come into play. Let's say we play this turn 1, right? It's already got 3 counters on it, right? Doesn't matter what kind of counters they are. They're just counters. So if it dies, if our Felisa is in play, we're already going to get 3 Inkling tokens, right? At the beginning of our upkeep, we're going to put another credit counter on it, right? So the longer this sits in play, the more counters it's going to get on it. And if it dies at any point, assuming it's not exiled, and yes, we do have sack outlets in this deck, obviously, but typically we're only going to use them for the, my opponent's about to path my creature so I don't get the dies trigger. That's really only what we're going to use them for, because creatures are usually dying all over the place anyway in a game, right? I'm not going to sacrifice my creature, get those Inkling tokens just so my opponent can board wipe the next turn. And to make matters even better, Acacian Money Changer has his own sacrifice ability. So we can even sacrifice him for his own ability if we want. This is what I want to be doing in the deck. 1 mana, put a creature in play. It's going to put these useless counters on it that we really don't care about. But when it dies, we get a bunch of Inkling tokens, right? Vebulid, same thing, 1 mana. Vebulid enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. At the beginning of our upkeep, we put a 1/1 counter on it, right? Again, it's just going to sit there. It's going to collect counters. If it attacks or blocks at the end of combat, destroy it. Great. Okay, so when it becomes an 8/8, we'll swing with it, smack our opponents for 8. It dies at the end of combat, and we get 8 Inkling tokens. Fantastic. Entrails Feaster, 1 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a creature card from a graveyard. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Entrails Feaster. Again, it's 1 mana. It's going to sit there. We get to exile stuff out of our opponent's graveyards, which I always like to put stuff like that in my decks. So that's going to be a benefit anyway. If we don't, we tap it. So what? It just sits there. We don't really want it for attacking or anything. It's just going to be there to collect counters. I really like Jotun Grunt, 1 and a white. Giant Soldier, 4/4. Cumulative upkeep, put 2 cards from a single graveyard at the bottom of their owner's library. This is actually not a bad card in Commander. Again, it's graveyard hate, right? We're taking 2 cards from a single graveyard, putting it on the bottom of the owner's library. This is a great graveyard hate card. And cumulative upkeep is age counters, right? So this is going to be getting a counter every single turn. And again, we can just choose not to pay the cumulative upkeep if we want it to die, right? If we want it to die, we can just not pay the upkeep. It dies, and we get an Inkling token for every age counter it has on it. By the way, we also have counters that we can put on our other stuff. So the age counters is on top of any other counters we might be putting on it, right? Mycologist. I mean, yes, I found a deck to put this. You know, a lot of these cards are cards that I just wanted to find decks for. Maybe some of them aren't fantastic, but I just think it's so funny that we can take these cards that are essentially horrible and turn them into usable cards. I really, really love that. And that's what I like about this commander. 1 and a white human druid O2. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a spore counter on Mycologist, right? You usually don't see this stuff outside of green. I mean, I don't even know is there a deck that this even goes in, because it does the spore counter thing, but in white. Remove 3 spore counters, create a sapling token, like none of that really matters, right? Essentially, this, again, just sits there, gets spore counters. It's got 5 spore counters on it. We chump block with it, and then we get a bunch of Inkling tokens, right? Osai Vultures, that's a funny one. A 1/1 flying bird, 2 mana. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, put a carrion counter on Osai Vultures. And again, you can remove the carrion counters to give it +1/+1, but we're never going to do that, right? It's just going to sit there and collect counters at the beginning of each end step. Transcendent Master, this is another one. You know, you could go all level up with this if you wanted to. I don't know how many level up cards there actually are, but that is a level counter. You're putting a counter on this. This one in particular, like Transcendent Master is actually pretty good. Probably one of the best when it comes to level up. You know, level up cards aren't fantastic. It can become a 6/6. It can become a 9/9. You know, eventually you can make it a 9/9 lifelink indestructible. That's pretty darn good. And then we probably don't want it to die. But if it does, we get 12 Inkling tokens. I put it in the deck though because the level up is only 1 colorless mana, so we can really just, you know, we got free mana. Let's throw some counters on this, and then we'll get value out of it later. I also put Call of the Death Dweller in here, right? It's going to return 2 target creature cards with total mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield that are probably already going to have counters on them, but then we're also going to put a Death Touch counter on either of them and a Menace counter on either of them, right? So that's more counters. I think that works great in the deck. A big thing here though is I thought, okay, well, we make a bunch of Inkling tokens, but when they die, we get nothing out of it. So I thought a card like Carrion Feeder would be fantastic in the deck. With Carrion Feeder, if someone board wipes and we have those Inkling tokens, they're just going to die and we get no value out of them. So now we can sacrifice them all, right? We sacrifice all those Inklings to our Carrion Feeder, put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on our Carrion Feeder, and then it dies and we get all those Inkling tokens. Basically, they just replace themselves, right? It's just fantastic in the deck. As you know, it's a sack outlet, so you're always going to want sack outlets in decks like this. Nadir, Agent of the Dust Knell, and Twilight Drover. Both of these cards, I think, are going to be seeing a lot of play. You know, there's a lot of these black and white +1/+1 counters decks. Nadir likes tokens leaving the battlefield, which is good for us in this deck. And he also puts +1/+1 counters on himself. So he's doing both. He's doing the token theme and he's doing the +1/+1 counter theme. Same with Twilight Drover, right? Whenever a creature token leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on them, you know, similar to Nadir. And then you can remove +1/+1 counters to make spirit tokens. So again, it's playing in both sides of the theme of what we're doing. I put Contagion Engine in the deck. You know, we can use this for both. You know, we can essentially use this on our opponents if we want. Obviously, we can just use this on ourselves. So if we want, we can put -1/-1 counters on our own creatures. I don't know if you're ever going to want to do that. This scenario could arise. It is a possibility. But mostly we put it in there for the proliferate, right? To pay 4 mana, we proliferate, then proliferate again. I also have Graceful Apparition, 1 and a white, flying. Whenever it deals combat damage, we get to proliferate. Midnight Banshee, this one's particularly great. 3 black, black, black. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on each non-black creature. So this is not going to put counters on our Inkling tokens because they're black. So I like that. It can put -1/-count counters on, say, our Acacian Money Changer. Okay, again, we're just putting more counters on it. So it's going to get a couple -1/-1 counters on it. It dies, so what? Then we get a whole bunch of Inkling tokens. Also hurts our opponent's creatures too, so that is important. Luminous Brood Moth, I think, is fantastic in the deck. right? I think everyone knows what this card does by now. Just a great commander card in general. Whenever one of our creatures dies, which our creatures are going to be dying a lot, they're going to come back. So we get to reuse them, which is great, but also puts a counter on our creature. Blood Tracker and Together Forever. These two cards are really going to be powerhouses in a lot of the... I've put both of these cards in a couple of decks already from Commander 2021. Blood Tracker, when it leaves the battlefield, you're going to draw a bunch of cards, and also we're going to get the Inkling tokens, so it's sort of serving double duty. Together Forever, I just talked about this in one of my 10 cards videos because I think this card is going to go in so many decks now with all these white cards that are putting counters on themselves, right? We can support 2, so we're going to put some counters on our creatures, great. But that second ability, pay 1, choose target creature with a counter on it. When it dies, you return it to owner's hand, right? So we're going to get the dies trigger. It is dying, right? So again, I'll use Acacian Money Changer here as the example. Our Acacian Money Changer dies. It has counters on it, so we can pay 1, get it back to our hand, play it again. We get the dies trigger, so we're going to get the Inkling tokens. This card's just fantastic in the deck. And then I put Nakara, Lair Scavenger, right? 2 and a black. Partner with Yannick Scavenging Sentinel. That doesn't mean anything, obviously, because we can't have Yannick in the deck, unfortunately. It's 2/2 with Menace, okay, but the important part is whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had 1 or more counters on it, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Fantastic. Fantastic fit in this deck. But what else are we doing in the deck? Well, I already talked about Black Sun Zenith. This is an auto-include in any Felisa deck, I think, right? Because this is... I'm going to kill everyone's creatures, but because I'm putting -1/-1 counters on my creatures, I'm getting that many Inkling tokens. So the example I used was, I cast this X is 5, I put 5 -1/-1 counters on my 5 creatures. I kill everyone else's creatures, presumably, and then because I had 5 creatures with 5 counters on them, assuming they don't have any other counters on them, I'm going to get 25 Inkling tokens. They probably will have other counters on them, so those counters are also going to be included in this. I mean, this could just be game over. I could get blown out by a board wipe, but basically my opponents are on a clock. Tetsamok, Primal Death, 6 mana, 6/6 with Death Touch, but who cares because it's never going to hit the table, okay? I have this in my Volroth Shapestealer deck for the exact same reason, which is it just puts a counter on stuff. You pay 1 black, you reveal Tetsamok from your hand and put a prey counter on target creature. For 1 black mana, we can just put prey counters on all of our creatures. And even if we do cast it, which we probably won't. I think I probably just want to keep this in my hand for the entire game. But if we do, it's only going to kill our opponent's creatures. It's not even going to kill ours. Yawgmoth, Thran Physician. I mean, this guy is just fantastic in the deck. He's great in any deck where you want to be sacrificing, right? Any sort of aristocrat's theme. We can pay 1 life. We can sacrifice another creature, which we want to be doing. Put a -1/-1 counter on a creature, which we want to be doing. Draw a card, which everybody wants to be doing. And then also, the ability that probably is not used nearly as much on Yawgmoth is black, discard a card, proliferate. That we want to be doing too. Everything he's doing fits with this deck, right? I also have Culling Dais. You know, I needed some sack outlets. This is one that doesn't see as much play anymore in Commander. 2 mana artifact, sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Culling Dais, and then you pay 1, sacrifice Culling Dais, draw a card for each charge counter on it. The reason why I decided to go with this is because we do have some proliferate effects. So the charge counters we're putting on it, we can proliferate and increase. So I thought it was a good fit. Wake the Dead, fantastic in this deck. It's fantastic in a lot of decks, but in particular in this deck, right? A lot of our creatures die, okay? So Acacian Money Changer, Vebulid, let's say they go to the graveyard. We cast this on an opponent's turn during combat, and then we return X target creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield, and we sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. That's the important part of this card, right? Because then they're going to die. So we can return our Acacian Money Changer and our Vebulid to play, and then when they die, however many counters they have, we get that many Inkling tokens, right? And then finally, Wave of Terror. 2 and a black enchantment. Cumulative upkeep. 1 colorless. At the beginning of your draw step, destroy each creature with converted mana cost equal to the number of age counters. On Wave of Terror, they can't be regenerated. So this card has been errated a little bit because they changed the way cumulative upkeep works, right? You pay the upkeep cost, and then on your draw step, that's when the destroy triggers. Now that's important. Now why is it important and why is it in this deck? And this is a really interesting card, probably a card I'll talk about in one of my 10 cards videos. The reason why I like this in this deck is because it doesn't destroy token creatures, okay? So if you're playing a deck in black that has lots of tokens, it skips over the 0 CMC, right? Because you play it, and then on your upkeep, you pay the cumulative upkeep, the 1, and then at the beginning of your draw step, you destroy each creature with converted mana cost equal to the number of age counters on Wave of Terror, and you already put 1 on it. So at no point are you going to destroy everything that costs 0, and your Inkling tokens cost 0. So right away you destroy all the 1s, and then the 2s, and so on and so forth. So I think this card, it's a fun card, it's interesting, and I think it works really good in a token deck because it skips over these 0 CMC creatures. So that is pretty much the deck. You know, I was super excited about Felisa when I first saw her because, again, just like with Atraxa, you know, there's so many different kinds of counters that there's so many different directions you can go. And as you can see from the very funny and interesting cards I have in the deck, that's what I love about it. However, I am concerned because as I was looking through cards, I came across a combo that I believe is an infinite or game-ending combo, and that is with Phyrexian Devourer. Phyrexian Devourer is famously a card that sort of goes infinite with a lot of different cards. You know, it's a 6-mana artifact creature. When Phyrexian Devourer's power is 7 or greater, you sacrifice it, and you exile the top card of your library to put X +1/+1 counters on Phyrexian Devourer. X is the exiled card's converted mana cost. So unless I'm missing something here, if I have my Felisa and my Phyrexian Devourer in play, I wait until my opponent's end step, and then I just start going nuts with my Phyrexian Devourer, and I exile half my library. That first ability is going to trigger when its power is 7 or greater. It's like a static trigger, so as soon as it gets to 7, it's immediately going to trigger, but it still has to use the stack so you can respond by continuing to put counters on it, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you'll get, let's say, 50 counters on it, and then you let it die, you let it sacrifice to its own ability, and it's going to create 50 2/1 Inkling tokens. You know, or you make however many you need to end the game, essentially. I think you probably should be able to do it without exiling your whole library. I don't know if anyone's come across this combo yet. You know, the reason I sound a little dejected about this is because this is the kind of stuff I don't like, because, I mean, yeah, a lot of people will see this and get real excited about this and go, I'm going to build a Felisa deck immediately. I don't, because then it becomes that combo. It's just like Heliod, right? The Sun Crowned. He comes out and I look at him and I'm all excited. Ooh, that's an interesting commander. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. Ooh, that's an interesting build around, right? And then you find out, oh, it just goes infinite with Walking Ballista. And it's like, oh, okay, well now I can't build that deck because as soon as I sit down at a table, everyone just assumes I'm doing the infinite combo that kills everyone. So I'm the arch enemy. Right? So that's why I'm a little concerned about that. I mean, maybe I'm overreacting a little and maybe that's not going to happen. And maybe I'm missing something here. I don't know how I am, though. I'm quite certain that works the way I think it does. I mean, I suppose your opponents would have a turn cycle to basically solve that problem. So it doesn't just end the game right away. Maybe I'm overreacting a little. I mean, I am going to put it in my version of the deck because I think that it is, you know, it's not an infinite combo. It's not necessarily a game-winning combo. You have to wait until your next turn for those Inklings to untap so you can attack with them and all of that, you know, and your opponents probably should see it coming from a mile away. I'm just concerned that this very interesting commander that I had a blast building a deck around is going to be ruined because of this combo. That's my only concern. Maybe I'm being pessimistic. I don't know. I guess only time will tell. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.